Guerrilla Cyber Dispatch, in association with the Cybersecurity Council.
Assemble the council.
Oh, hi. Guerrilla Cyber Dispatch here. I don't think you can see me. I'll come to you. You asked for the dispatch, right? Guerrilla Cyber Dispatch is definitely here at your service. And this is where you want to talk? Here? In an abandoned building? You're the boss. Look, this is a big one. It's hot. I've got all the notes. Give me a moment to get set up. We'll do the full dispatch. Salt Typhoon. Remember this quote. U.S. officials said Tuesday, that's December 3rd, 2024, they had not been able to expel Chinese government hackers from telecommunications companies and internet service providers, warning concerned users to turn to encrypted messages and giving no time for securing the carriers. Salt Typhoon. This cyber attack has already been dubbed the worst telecommunications hack in our nation's history. That quote was per Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner. Salt Typhoon has already become a significant milestone in our cybersecurity history. The attack targeted the telecommunications infrastructure of the United States, causing widespread disruption and highlighting vulnerabilities across the sector. I need to mention other countries were attacked too. In security operations, our aim is not to incite fear, uncertainty, or doubt. Instead, we want to give you real information. Salt Typhoon has been with us for a few months now, and while it is a continuing and developing situation, we already know the attack is serious, the adversary is serious. Let's talk about the first week of December 2024. In typical mainstream news media fashion, they latched on to that headline. Mark Warner's quote, "The worst telecommunications hack in our nation's history," that was shortened to the worst attack in our nation's history. It's just a one-word change, but that's enough to make things go viral, right? It's the nature of our media to be provocative, but a misquote like that makes things very difficult for people in threat intel and the security operators and incident responders out there trying to make a difference and get traction. But a little bit of graciousness is also warranted here. It's somewhat understandable that the news media over-rotated. They were getting news from CISA, the FBI, the NSA, and from intelligence agencies from 3 other countries as well. In fact, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand joined together to produce joint guidance. The volume goes way up when intelligence agencies from 4 countries join together. Adding to this very noisy cyber news week, both the FBI and CISA released alerts. The FBI released a public service announcement about fraud and generative AI. And CISA, in joint with all of those agencies I just mentioned, released a communications infrastructure hardening guidance. And you can draw some scary lines between these alerts and the activities and threat of Salt Typhoon. But there was more. Also spreading the alarm last week, CISA and FBI officials went off-roading. By off-roading, what I mean to say is they made unofficial comments that are a bit eye-popping. I'll be specific. While talking to reporters and news outlets, they made unofficial comments, meaning not policy, not official guidance, that folks, everyday consumers, everyday Americans should use end-to-end encryption and protect their voice and email traffic and all of their data. Now, end-to-end encryption for everyone is not the official position of many of our intelligence agencies. So this raised some eyebrows, and it points to the significance of the Salt Typhoon attack. We have to pause for a moment of historical significance here. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies have a complicated relationship with encryption technology. Historically, they do not advocate for full end-to-end encryption for average citizens. In fact, they roll the other way because they want law enforcement to have access to digital materials. And they don't even want a warrant to slow that process down. I'm exaggerating a little bit for effect, but when the FBI and CISA suddenly start suggesting encryption is the right thing for the common folk, people started asking questions. This seeming reversal of attitude may have to do with the fact that Salt Typhoon may have gone after both presidential campaigns earlier this year. Do you remember those stories of Trump and Vance and cell phones being compromised? Yeah, things are changing on the ground. This hack may have intelligence agencies rethinking how they do business, and the impacts may reach all the way to the little people. Current status of Salt Typhoon, as of the announcements last week, December 1st, 2nd, and the majority of them on December 3rd, the adversaries were still active in up to 8 telecommunications providers in the U.S. There's no clear guidance on when containment and eradication efforts will be completed. I'd like to give you some background. Salt Typhoon is a hacking group that has been active, perhaps since 2020. The group has conducted cyber attacks on targets in the US and other countries. The group employs advanced persistent threat techniques. That involves gaining access to target networks and maintaining a presence there undetected for an extended period. Advanced plus persistent. This approach enables the attackers to collect substantial information about the targeted organizations. Salt Typhoon is also known by other names, including Ghost Emperor, Famous Sparrow, Earth Estries, and UNC 2286. The FBI and Microsoft named the group Salt Typhoon as part of Microsoft's convention of using Typhoon to identify nation-state threat actors originating from China. Volt Typhoon and Flax Typhoon. I'll say that again. Volt Typhoon and Flax Typhoon are other APTs in specific campaigns that security agencies and researchers have been tracking in recent months or years. To quote the Wall Street Journal, last week, U.S. officials said they had disrupted a network of more than 200,000 routers, cameras, and other internet-connected consumer devices that served as an entry point into U.S. networks for a China-based hacking group called Flax Typhoon. And in January, federal officials disrupted Volt Typhoon, yet another China-linked campaign that has sought to quietly infiltrate a swath of U.S. critical infrastructure. It is important to mention that Chinese officials reject these accusations and associations with Salt, Volt, and Flax Typhoon. Recently, they even said Volt Typhoon is actually a ransomware criminal group who calls itself the Dark Power and is not sponsored by any state or region. I personally find it a bit amusing that reporters from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other news outlets call the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. to retrieve these types of comments. Like, just imagine, ring, ring. Hi, Chinese embassy. Are you hacking us? Can you please comment on the record? And to stay with that little thought experiment, just realize that conversation may have happened 10, 20, or even 50 times this year. From the Washington Post again, on Wednesday, December 4th, Ann Neuberger, the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Technologies, said the Salt Typhoon hack of at least 8 American telecommunications companies was part of a global Chinese campaign that has affected dozens of countries around the world. The point is, Salt Typhoon is big, it's sustained, it's targeted, and it has all the hallmarks of a nation-state actor with all the resources necessary to go for 0 days and a big game. The Salt Typhoon hack has other unique implications that raise the threat level. We got to talk about Huawei. We, the US, just started a major rip and replace action to evict Huawei hardware, aka Chinese hardware, from US infrastructure. There were many allegations of backdoors and routers and other pieces of technology being in our infrastructure. After an extensive public and political campaign, the choices were made to rip and replace. Well, it looks like Salt Typhoon. Well, those adversaries read the writing on the wall and they have pivoted, they've updated their tactics, techniques, and procedures. It's also important to know the removal of Huawei hardware from government networks is an ongoing process. In the United States, the government has been actively working to remove Huawei and ZTE equipment from its telecommunications infrastructure due to the national security concerns. Recently, the U.S. House of Representatives approved a $3 billion funding initiative to help telecom companies replace this equipment. However, this process is nowhere near complete. Efforts are underway to fully remove and replace the hardware. All of this makes me think, and this is speculation on behalf of Guerrilla Cyber Dispatch, the bad guys knew they were in a use it because we're going to lose it anyways scenario. So they escalated, they accelerated, they pivoted, as every intelligent adversary does. But back to Salt Typhoon directly. Initial discovery. Salt Typhoon was first identified when unusual activity was detected across several major telecommunications networks. Initially, the anomalies were thought to be isolated incidents, but further investigation revealed a coordinated and sophisticated attack aimed at compromising the integrity and security of communication systems nationwide. A few weeks ago, I'm going back to September, investigators into this hacking group believed that Salt Typhoon had broken into U.S. internet service providers. Investigators were specifically exploring whether the group had compromised core routers. And if that was true, that would have implied that Salt Typhoon had already achieved a major compromise of cable and broadband networks. Like any cyber attack, the early details were murky. Unfortunately, greater fears have been realized. And oh yeah, the attack is still underway. I'd like to give you a timeline of events. June 12th to mid-July 2024, Black Lotus Labs, part of Lumen, observes anomalous traffic on Versa Director servers. This may have been the discovery of Salt Typhoon activities. July 26th, Black Lotus Labs notifies their customers. August 8th, Black Lotus Labs updates and continues working with their customers. August 22nd, Lumen Technologies, Black Lotus Labs, publicly announces active exploitation of active zero-day vulnerabilities in Versa Director servers. That was identified as CVE 2024-39717. Even this initial team's investigation, Black Lotus Labs, suggested the activity is likely associated with Volt Typhoon. I am speculating once again, but I believe they were already in contact with law enforcement. They were associating with known activities of Flax and Volt Typhoon, and they came to these reasonable conclusions. As an aside, the Black Lotus Labs and Lumen Technologies report of the anomaly and their investigation is very, very well written, and you should take a look at that just to know how to do well on an incident report. August 27th, the White House and senior officials begin to respond publicly to this event, and that's reported by the Washington Post. September 26th, we're leaping a month forward in time. The Wall Street Journal reports China-linked hackers breach U.S. internet providers in new Salt Typhoon attack. This was the first time that Salt Typhoon is publicly disclosed. October 8th, Bruce Schneier, the legendary cybersecurity researcher, reads a lot of these initial reports that are being publicly disclosed, and he points out that a supply chain attack or perhaps a backdoor in an intermediary may be involved. October 25th, the FBI and CISA partner to issue a joint statement. They say they are investigating unauthorized access to commercial telecommunications infrastructure by actors affiliated with the People's Republic of China. Additional details are very sparse. November 13th, the FBI and CISA update their joint statement. We have identified that PRC-affiliated actors have compromised networks of multiple telecommunications companies to enable the theft of customer call records data, the compromise of private communications of a limited number of individuals who are primarily involved in government or political activity, and the copying of certain information that was subject to U.S. law enforcement requests pursuant to court orders. I'll explain each of those in a moment. We expect our understanding of these compromises to grow as the investigation continues. November 22nd. This is where the wheel really begins to spin, my friends. Top telecom executives met with U.S. national security officials at the White House to address concerns over an ongoing Chinese cyber espionage campaign targeting senior U.S. political figures. So the corporate execs are brought to the White House to talk this through. Remember that. We're going to talk about that again in a moment. November 23rd. This is when Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Mark Warner calls Salt Typhoon the worst telecommunications hack in our nation's history while talking with CNN. Then, in the first week of December 2024, we get a flurry of alerts, disclosures, and comments. This is the moment that the public really begins to grasp what Salt Typhoon is all about. I'm going to walk you through December 3rd. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, they like security so much they put that in their name twice, in collaboration with the FBI, the NSA, and intelligence agencies of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, issue a preliminary notice to all telecommunications providers warning of potential vulnerabilities and advising immediate action to assess and secure systems. Their guidance is thorough and long. I will tell you more later. It may be an entirely different dispatch. On December 3rd, 2024, we're still on this same day, the FBI issues an alert in the form of a public service announcement. The title of the announcement is Criminals Use Generative Artificial Intelligence to Facilitate Financial Fraud. It explains that generative AI can generate fraudulent messages, voice, social media profiles, and a lot more. Basically, it's saying that identity is going deep fake. The alert also includes a very curious recommendation. Create a secret word or phrase with your family to verify their identity. We're going to have to talk about that more too. Secret words? Still with December 3rd, the Washington Post issues this quote, and you've already heard me say this today. U.S. officials said Tuesday they had not been able to expel government hackers from telecommunications companies and internet service providers, warning concerned users to turn to encrypted messages and giving no timeline for securing carriers. As of right now, that announcement was 7 days ago. To continue, given where we are in discovering the activity, I think it would be impossible for us to predict a time frame on when we'll have full eviction of the hackers from the networks, said Jeff Green, Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at CISA. Here's a few things just to know that were revealed in all of those conversations. It is suggested that the attack started in the spring of 2024. Large amounts of sensitive data have been stolen. The hackers were able to compromise court orders for monitoring specific phone numbers. The hackers were able to eavesdrop on some government and political targets. It's important to note that other reporting came out late in the U.S. presidential election that there were cyber attempts to monitor both presidential campaigns, and that the Trump campaign specifically had calls intercepted. To continue in the news of the day, calling records were compromised by Salt Typhoon, or at least the adversaries had the access to be able to do that. And then finally, core networks were in fact, or I want to make sure my reporting is accurate, at least allegedly compromised. Core Cisco systems are being strengthened as we speak. And I find that interesting because the core router situation was potentially listed as being compromised all the way back in September. It takes time to do the big things, folks. Full pause. Full pause. Let's go back to November 22nd. That was the day when all of the top telecom officials were brought to Washington, D.C. to meet with national security officials. In that meeting, it is likely that they would have had all the intel and artifacts that I have worked through in the last few minutes. This is everything that would become public 12 days later on December 3rd. All of those telecom executives and their cybersecurity and engineering staff had already been hard at work trying to confront, contain, and eradicate the adversaries. But now they had that added pressure of knowing that a public reckoning was due. It would be coming soon. Now, I suspect all of these folks had already been working long hours in collaboration with CISA, the NSA, the FBI, other law enforcement to do the work, to fight the good fight. But I want to point out the emotional perspective here. Imagine you are with your family at Thanksgiving dinner, and you know that the White House press secretary or some other government senior official may call out your company by name in a few days. You're in the middle of the fight. You're working round the clock. Now, I'm taking some poetic license here to be sure. I wasn't in the room for these conversations. I don't represent any of these companies. But I know how cyber moves, and I know about incident response. And Salt Typhoon had been in play for weeks at that point. My heart goes out to the professionals that had to make a difference, that sacrificed to get the job done. Their blood, sweat, and tears is not lost on me. We also have to recognize the pressure is not gone. The adversaries may still be there. The fight continues. I want to break the fourth wall and look directly at my listeners right now. I'm having fun with the Guerrilla Cyber Dispatch, trying to make cyber fun and engaging. But I want everyone to know there is a cost when things go sideways. Cybersecurity burnout is real. If you are in the fight right now, thank you. Take care, stay cyber, stay safe. Specific technical details of the attack remain classified. It is known that Salt Typhoon utilized advanced methods to infiltrate and manipulate network systems. The attackers employed sophisticated encryption techniques, making detection and mitigation efforts particularly challenging. The breach targeted both hardware and software components. That indicates a level of high expertise and resources behind the operation. In terms of response and mitigation, obviously all of the government agencies and corporate resources across the private sector are doing the investigating, they're doing their remediation efforts, and we wish them Godspeed. Guidelines for immediate actions to secure vulnerable networks and mitigate further damage has been issued. Not just by Black Lotus Labs, but the joint statement guidance I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of long-term consequences that will come from Salt Typhoon. The attack has certainly already prompted a reevaluation of cybersecurity strategies within the telecommunications sector. I am hopeful that will lead to further investment, perhaps adoption of better regulatory strategies, and the development of enhanced protocols for incident response. Additionally, Salt Typhoon has spurred a broader conversation about the resilience of national infrastructure against cyber threats. In the next Guerrilla Cyber Dispatch, we will talk about the FBI alert and the CISA alert in greater detail. It is important to look at the details because they reveal the real scope of Salt Typhoon activities, especially the threats. We'll talk about what it means that our intelligence agencies may be changing their attitudes on encryption for the masses. Until next time, stay cyber, stay safe. This has been Guerrilla Cyber Dispatch. Oh man, been on the floor too long. I don't know if I'm going to make it to the sock tomorrow. Oh.
Assemble the council.